I always thought getting into college would be the moment they finally saw me, not just the grades, not just the responsibility, but me. Turns out, they were too busy cheering for my brother's latest business idea to even notice. The summer of 2017 in our Pittsburgh suburb was humid and full of backyard barbecues. Every neighbor had an opinion about which school was worth the debt and who among the local graduates would actually make it out there. I kept quiet during those conversations, clutching my acceptance letter to the University of Pittsburgh like it was some fragile thing that could dissolve if touched too many times. "Mom, I got in," I said, sliding the letter across the kitchen counter one afternoon. My voice barely rose above the hum of the dishwasher. She dried her hands on a dish towel, glanced at the seal, and smiled. "That's wonderful, honey. You worked so hard." Dad, who was passing through with his tablet, nodded absently. "Told you she'd get in," he muttered before adding, "Now, Ethan, have you heard back from that startup incubator?" And just like that, the spotlight shifted. I hadn't even gotten a proper congratulations before the conversation spun toward Ethan's latest pitch deck. My brother Ethan had the kind of charm that made people want to believe in him, even when he had nothing concrete. At 20, he was already dabbling in 2 failed businesses and 1 podcast about entrepreneurship that he recorded in his bedroom. But to my parents, he was a visionary. To me, he was a well-dressed tornado who never cleaned up the debris. Graduation day came fast. Our high school did the whole affair at the football field, and I wore cords for honors and clubs while Ethan wore his sunglasses and smirked like he belonged on a stage. That evening, we had a small gathering in our backyard. Folding chairs lined the patio, and Dad grilled hot dogs while the neighbors sipped from plastic cups. I heard Mrs. Franklin from next door gush to my parents, "Claire is such a bright girl. I bet she's got scholarships lined up." Mom beamed, but what she said was, "Yes, but we're really hoping Ethan's app idea takes off this year." I swallowed the rest of my lemonade a little too quickly. When it came time for gifts, they gave me a wrapped box with a neat little ribbon. Inside was a leather-bound planner embossed with the words 2020 Vision. Clean pages. Gold-lined edges. A small note tucked in the cover said, "So proud of you. Keep striving. Love, Mom and Dad." Ethan, meanwhile, unwrapped a sleek drone with a camera. "This'll be great for capturing promo footage," he said, turning it over with a grin. Dad clapped him on the back. "You've got to document the hustle," he said. I smiled politely because that's what was expected. But inside, something pinched. Later that night, after the last guest left and the mosquitoes took over, Grandpa Walter found me sitting alone on the porch swing. He handed me a bowl of melting ice cream and sat beside me. "I hear you're headed to Pitt," he said. His voice was always calm, like a slow river. I nodded. "Yeah, architecture. If the loans come through." He looked out over the backyard. "You've always built things, even when you didn't have the pieces." Then he turned to me and smiled. "If I were investing again, I'd put my money on you." It was the first time anyone said something that didn't involve Ethan, and I tucked his words into my chest like a secret talisman. That night, I went upstairs to shower. As I stepped out of the bathroom, I heard voices from the hallway. My parents' door was cracked, their conversation floating just enough for me to catch the gist. "He just needs a leg up," Dad said. "If we don't support Ethan now, when will we? What about Claire?" Mom's voice softer. "She'll be fine. She's the independent one." I stood there, towel in hand, heartbeat thudding in my ears. The independent one. That was their label for me. The justification for everything they didn't give. That planner suddenly felt heavier on my nightstand. I lay awake for hours, watching the ceiling fan turn shadows across my bedroom walls. I'd always told myself they loved us equally, but perhaps not the same. Ethan needed help. I provided peace of mind. And peace of mind doesn't get drones or seed funding. In the silence of my room, I asked a question I'd never dared form before. Would I ever be more than the one who doesn't need anything? I expected the sleepless nights and brutal critiques in architecture studio. I just didn't think they'd be stacked on top of coffee shop shifts at dawn and reshelving library books past midnight. I was 19 and already moving like someone twice that age, shoulders tense, eyes scanning price tags like they were test questions. My roommate Mia noticed. She noticed everything. "You're running low on creamer again," she said one morning, holding up the almost empty bottle from the fridge. "And ramen. And, actual food." I forced a laugh, still pulling on my oversized hoodie. "Guess it's time for another deluxe grocery trip, aka peanut butter and bread." She didn't push, just raised an eyebrow the way only Mia could. "You sure you're okay, Claire?" "I'm fine," I said too quickly. But I wasn't. My part-time jobs barely covered rent for our shoebox apartment, let alone tuition gaps, studio supplies, and the mounting interest on my student loans. The heating rattled more than it radiated warmth, and I slept in socks and 3 layers. There were nights I swore I could see my own breath. My parents called once a week, usually on Sundays. Dad asked generic questions, "Classes going well?" before handing the phone to Mom, who talked more about Ethan than me. "Your brother just ordered a standing desk," she gushed once. "And did you see his new logo? So clean and modern." I had seen it. On Instagram. Ethan had converted our parents' guest bedroom into a sleek home office. Whiteboard wall, floating shelves, ergonomic chair, the works. His caption read, "The grind never stops laptop computer, #startup life." And in the background, the same $2,000 MacBook I'd once dreamed of owning. I built models by hand. He built hashtags. That week, I finally asked, "Do you think you could help me with tuition this semester?" I said over the phone, choosing my words carefully. "Even just a portion? Books are getting more expensive." There was a pause, then the soft clink of her stirring tea. "Sweetie, you know we love you, but things are really tight right now. Ethan's project is at a critical stage. We're stretched so thin." I nodded into the silence, though she couldn't see me. "Of course. You're the responsible one, Claire. You always land on your feet." I hung up feeling like someone had mistaken my survival for a safety net. My feet weren't landing, they were constantly slipping. The days bled together. Mornings at the coffee shop meant burning my hands on paper cups and spelling names wrong on purpose, because I was too tired to care. Clear instead of Claire. Clay. Once I got carrot. I let it slide. Afternoons were class, then hours at the library pushing a cart through the quiet maze of stacks. At night, I'd work on design assignments at my desk, tracing building elevations with a ruler that belonged to my high school drafting kit. My laptop fan wheezed like it had asthma. One night, it just shut off mid-save, and I cried so hard I gave myself a headache. Mia walked in to find me curled in my desk chair, surrounded by balled-up chip bags and half a can of tuna. "You can't keep doing this," she whispered, pulling a blanket around me. I wanted to explain that I didn't have a choice. That the planner my parents gave me last year sat untouched because who had time to plan? Late one Thursday night, I closed up the coffee shop and walked the icy sidewalk back to our apartment. The wind cut through my coat and my fingers ached. I barely felt the hunger anymore. Inside, I reheated a slice of leftover frozen pizza. The crust had gone hard in the fridge, but I chewed through it anyway, scrolling mindlessly on my phone. There he was again, Ethan, grinning with a group of 20-somethings in a rented loft space lit by Edison bulbs. The caption, "Pitch night success. Clients secured. Vision coming to life." Beneath it, comments flooded in. "Fire, fire, fire, inspiring. Dude, killing it." I stared at the screen, cold slice halfway to my mouth. And it hit me not just the ache, but the weight. I was financing his future with my silence. Every dollar I didn't ask for. Every time I accepted were stretched thin. Every moment I told myself to be grateful I had a roof at all. All of it fed the machine that kept him shining while I flickered. I set down the pizza and wiped my greasy fingers on a napkin that felt too thin to absorb anything. My breath caught. I couldn't even afford real napkins. Then the knock came. It was soft at first. I thought maybe Mia forgot her keys again. But when I looked toward the window, I saw a familiar silhouette. Grandpa Walter. He stood outside the coffee shop window, now closed for the night, holding 2 takeaway cups. His jacket collar was flipped up against the wind, and he was squinting through the glass like he wasn't sure it was really me. I opened the door, and the jingle of the bell sounded oddly bright in the dark. "Thought I'd find you here," he said, stepping in with a gust of cold air. "Can I steal 5 minutes?" My throat tightened. I hadn't seen him in months. "Yeah," I managed, blinking back the sting in my eyes. 5 minutes sounds really good right now. Thanksgiving break was never going to be restful this year. My off-campus apartment had flooded during a freak plumbing incident, a busted pipe from the upstairs unit, so with no dry floorboards and only a soggy mattress left behind. I took my mom up on her offer to stay at the house while they were away in Asheville on a couple's retreat. The moment I stepped inside, something felt different. The air was still familiar lemon cleaner and my dad's cologne, but the house looked updated. New countertops. A flat screen that definitely wasn't there last spring. Hardwood instead of the old carpet that used to catch crumbs no matter how often we vacuumed. But it was Ethan's room that stopped me cold. His door had always been closed when I visited, but this time it was wide open like an exhibit. Inside, it looked like a tech startup's showroom. Wall-mounted monitor, cable management so tidy it felt surgical, and a sleek standing desk with a Herman Miller chair, retail price, $1,200. I only knew that because I'd drooled over one on Craigslist a few months back and laughed at the idea of affording it. Pinned above the desk was a whiteboard covered in diagrams, timelines, and bold words like scale, market capture, and angel investor. Except I now knew exactly who that last one was. Later that night, as I tried to salvage my Thanksgiving weekend by catching up on assignments, I realized I'd left my stapler in my soaked apartment. I remembered my dad kept supplies in the home office. The room hadn't changed much, same heavy desk, same green banker's lamp, but the filing cabinet was new. Sleek metal, Loctite. I opened a desk drawer instead and rummaged for a stapler. Under a few pens and sticky notes, I found a manila folder labeled in my father's precise handwriting. Ethan. Business. Something in me paused. My fingers hesitated. I could almost hear Grandpa Walter's voice from our last phone call. Silence in families is rarely peace. It's usually protection for someone. I opened the folder. Inside were printed transaction records. Line after line of wire transfers from my parents' joint account to Ethan's LLC, amounts like $20,000, $35,000. One memo read, Seed Funding, Phase 2. Another showed a payment for marketing consultant. There were airline tickets to LA, a reservation at a hotel I could never dream of staying in, and receipts for dinners over $400 with client notes attached. I put the folder down, suddenly lightheaded. Reached for another one beneath it. Claire Loans. It contained exactly 1 page. My scholarship award letter, printed on plain paper. No notations, no support plan, not even a post-it. I flipped the folder upside down just to be sure. Nothing else fell out. I found more folders. Ethan, equipment. Ethan, taxes. Ethan, travel. All thick with documentation. Back in high school, I'd once thought my parents were just being cautious, saving more for retirement, weathering economic uncertainty. But this wasn't cautious. This was curated. A whole fiction designed to make me believe there wasn't enough. I opened a drawer I'd always been told not to touch. There, in a neat stack, were tax returns from the last 5 years. My father's accounting firm had done well. Very well. A sharp jump in income right around the time I applied to college. Their tight budget story was just that, a story. My hands moved on instinct. I pulled out my phone, snapped picture after picture, heart racing. Every time the flash flickered, I half expected them to walk in even though I knew they were hundreds of miles away. Then I found the most damning piece, a property title. A fully furnished studio apartment in downtown Pittsburgh, bought outright, with utilities and fees routed through my parents' bank. Registered under Ethan's LLC. I stared at the document, numb. I'd been working 30 hours a week while maintaining a full course load. Meanwhile, Ethan had an apartment he probably used more for Instagram shoots than actual living. My hands started to shake. I sat in my father's chair, deep leather, the kind that creaks under your weight, and stared straight ahead. The lamp hummed. The printer blinked. My planner, still with unused pages, sat back in my flooded room. I had been so careful with my steps, so diligent, so understanding, and yet I was never walking on solid ground. I dialed Grandpa Walter. He answered on the second ring, voice warm as always. Pumpkin? I couldn't even say hi. I just whispered, "You need to see this." His tone shifted instantly. "What's going on?" "They didn't just lie to me," I said, swallowing the lump in my throat. "They lied to you too." We sat down for turkey, stuffing, and a side of generational betrayal. The dining room looked like something out of a magazine spread. Mom had polished the silver, laid out cloth napkins folded like tiny sailboats, and placed name cards on each plate as if any of us didn't know where we usually sat. "Isn't this lovely?" she said, smoothing her apron and glancing at Ethan. "Very Martha Stewart," I said, forcing a smile. Ethan beamed, already 3 sips into his wine. "You should have seen the guy at my pitch meeting Monday. He said our customer acquisition model was the most scalable he's seen in months." Mom laughed like she understood what that meant. "You're just so good at talking to people." Dad raised his glass toward Ethan. "Here's to getting in the room where it happens." I glanced down at my plate, cranberry sauce shaped exactly like the can it came from, and thought about how many rooms I'd been in where no one listened at all. Dinner progressed like a play we'd all rehearsed. Ethan talked, they praised, I chewed quietly. The table was warm, the food was perfect, and my stomach churned with more than just mashed potatoes. I waited until dessert. When Mom carried in the pumpkin pie and Ethan made another toast, this time to resilience and building something from nothing, I reached for my phone. I didn't say a word, just tapped the screen, opened the folder labeled receipts, and slid it across the table until it stopped in front of Dad. "What's this?" he asked, brows knitting together. "Photos," I said softly, "of your wire transfers, tax returns, property records, the nothing Ethan built with everything you gave him." The room froze. The only sound was the clink of Mom setting down a fork too quickly. Ethan stared at the screen, then looked at me. I thought you wanted to do it all on your own. That's what they told me. I nodded once. They lied to both of us. Dad's face hardened. You had no right to go through my office. You had no right to use Grandpa's money and lie to us all. Mom tried to intervene, voice brittle. Claire, this is not the time. This is exactly the time, I said, leveling my gaze. I've spent 3 years building a future on instant coffee and student debt while you funded Ethan's pitch decks and Peloton workouts. Ethan's mouth opened like he might protest, but nothing came out. Then the doorbell rang. For a beat, no one moved. Then Dad stood up slowly, walking toward the door with the posture of a man headed to trial. I knew who it was. I had called him that morning. Grandpa Walter stepped in wearing his signature brown overcoat, a scarf tucked neatly around his neck. He carried a small folder in one hand and set it gently on the table like it contained something sacred. Let's all stop pretending, he said, removing his gloves. Dad, this really isn't, my father began. Grandpa raised a hand. No, it is. It's exactly what it is. He sat down beside me, opened his folder, and pulled out his own printed records, matching mine. For 10 years, he said slowly, I've contributed to what you both called the college fund. Nearly $200,000. Split evenly. For both Claire and Ethan. Mom's breath caught. Her wine glass trembled ever so slightly. I've reviewed the accounts, he continued. Every cent went to Ethan. Not a dollar to Claire. Dad opened his mouth, closed it, reached for his water, but didn't drink. Was it because you thought she didn't need it? Grandpa asked, voice low and firm. Because she wouldn't complain? Because she doesn't talk in hashtags and business buzzwords. No one answered. He turned to me. I'm sorry I didn't ask sooner. My throat tightened, but I nodded. You're here now. Grandpa looked around the table. This ends tonight. I've already begun transferring funds directly to Claire. And if there's any further misappropriation, I'll handle it legally. The room went silent again. The kind of silence that used to feel polite in our house, but now just felt cowardly. I stood, folded my napkin, and placed it beside my untouched pie. I'm going for a walk. As I slipped on my coat, the front door creaked open behind me. Ethan. Claire, he said quietly. Wait. I didn't. He caught up on the porch, stuffing his hands into his pockets. I didn't know. Not about the money. Not like that. I said nothing. He exhaled, a long stream of breath curling in the cold air. But I believe you now. I looked at him then, not as the golden boy or the favorite, but as someone who might be finally seeing clearly for the first time. Good, I said. Start there. I didn't confront them to get anything back. I did it so I could finally move forward. Winter came to Pittsburgh like it always did, slushy sidewalks, buses running late, the constant hum of radiators struggling to keep up. But for once, I didn't feel like I was bracing for a storm. I was inside, wrapped in warmth I didn't have to justify. Grandpa Walter moved quickly after Thanksgiving. By mid-December, the trust he'd created was active. Tuition, housing, basic expenses, all handled through a private account he monitored himself. No strings, he said over a cup of black coffee at our usual cafe. Just what should have always been yours. I didn't cry, though my hands trembled as I stirred cream into my mug. For years, I'd felt like my life was built on borrowed time, duct tape, and deferred payments. Now, for the first time, I could breathe. I quit one job, kept the library gig because I liked the quiet, and started seeing a campus therapist. Dr. Rowe had kind eyes and didn't ask for a summary of my entire life in the first session. She simply said, "Tell me what's been heavy." Over the weeks, I unpacked more than I realized I'd carried. The planner, the drone, the silent dinners, the constant responsibility. The feeling of being seen only in terms of how little I needed. "It's not that I wanted more than Ethan," I told her one day. "I just wanted to be counted." Sleep returned in small doses. I bought a real winter coat on sale, but still warm enough to stop the wind from cutting through me. I cooked actual meals with Mia, even taught her how to make my grandmother's lentil soup. "This is so adult," she said, grinning over her steaming bowl. Then, one Saturday, Ethan showed up. He didn't call first, just knocked, hands shoved in his coat pockets, eyes nervous. Mia was out, so I let him in and made tea. "I know this doesn't fix anything," he said, settling on the edge of the couch. "But I've been thinking about what you said." I sat across from him, waiting. "They always said you were just different. Quieter. Less needy." But what they meant was easier to ignore. Or maybe disposable. He swallowed hard. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." I believed him. Not because his voice cracked or because his apology was perfect, but because he didn't make excuses. Just sat there, letting the truth breathe between us. "I don't need you to fix what they broke," I said after a long pause. "I just need you to be real with me. From now on." He nodded, eyes glistening. "Deal." We didn't hug, but we didn't need to. Something had shifted. At school, things started shifting too. Professor Klein pulled me aside after class one day. "Your design work," she said, tilting her head. "There's something new in it. Depth. Boldness." "What changed?" I shrugged, a little smile creeping in. "I think I stopped trying to shrink." That week, I got word I'd been selected for a competitive summer architecture program in New York, focused on sustainable urban design. Mia shrieked when I told her, nearly spilling her cereal. "Finally," she said, tackling me with a hug. "You better come back with weird glasses and coffee snobbery." "I already have both," I teased. Small wins stacked up like bricks. I signed a new lease with reasonable heating. Treated myself to a good haircut. Walked through campus without headphones, letting the cold wake me up instead of numb me. Then, one snowy morning in January, an email notification popped up while I was revising a design mock-up. Subject: Fellowship Notification. Message: Congratulations, Claire. You've been awarded a full architecture fellowship beginning next fall. I stared at the screen. My tea cooled beside me. My heart didn't race, it settled. For the first time in years, the next chapter wasn't something to survive. It was mine to build. Spring in Pittsburgh had a soft persistence about it. The city's brick buildings warmed under longer days. Tulips pushed through cracked sidewalks, and everything smelled faintly of rain and pavement. On the day I graduated from my master's program, it didn't pour, but the sky held a silver stillness, as if waiting for something to begin. The ceremony was small. Our department held it in the campus gallery, surrounded by models and sketches from years of effort. I stood at the podium in a navy dress and borrowed heels, staring out at the people who mattered, Professor Klein near the front, Grandpa Walter beside her in a charcoal suit that hung a little looser than before. Behind them, Ethan waved. He was halfway through business school now. His energy had softened, not dimmed, but settled. And further back, almost hesitant, sat my parents. I hadn't asked them to come, but I hadn't told them not to either. I cleared my throat. I used to think architecture was only about buildings, about structure, geometry, clean lines. I paused. But what I've learned is it's really about people. About making space where someone who's overlooked can finally be seen. A few heads nodded. Someone in the back clapped softly. I didn't grow up knowing words like equity or inclusion, I continued. But I did grow up knowing what it felt like to eat in a cold room, to be praised for being quiet, to build futures on my own. And now I want to be the kind of architect who builds for kids like that girl. When I finished, the applause was warm, not thunderous, not showy, but real. At dinner that evening, a modest Italian place near Squirrel Hill, Grandpa Walter handed me a wrapped bundle. Something old for the next chapter. I peeled back the paper to find my high school sketchbook, its edges frayed, but still firm. Inside the front cover was a note in his handwriting. You were always building. Now the world gets to see. I blinked hard, fighting tears, and leaned over to hug him gently. His arms were thinner than I remembered, but his voice was steady. I'm proud of the architect you became, he whispered. But I'm even prouder of the woman you are. Later, Ethan pulled me aside by the dessert table. You didn't just survive us, Claire, he said, voice low. You surpassed all of us. I smiled, not out of triumph, but relief. We weren't who we'd been. And that was enough. Then Mom came over. She looked like she had rehearsed what to say a dozen times, but still wasn't sure how to begin. Instead of speaking, she handed me a folded card. I waited until she stepped away to open it. If you're ever ready, it read, I'd like to try again. No excuses. No signature. Just space. It felt fitting. A week later, I walked through my first completed project, a community center built in the same zip code I grew up in. It had wide doorways, quiet study rooms, play spaces with sunlit windows, and benches near outlets for kids who needed to charge their only device. In the corner, a little girl sat sketching on a clipboard, her knees pulled to her chest. She reminded me of someone. I didn't get the childhood I deserved. But I'm building spaces for kids who still can. Walking through that sunlit community center, I finally felt at peace, not because the past had been rewritten, but because I had reclaimed my own story. Sometimes, the love we long for doesn't arrive in the shape we expect, or from the people we hoped, but healing can still grow in its place. Families falter, foundations crack, but the strongest structures are the ones rebuilt with truth, care, and intention. If this story reminded you of your own journey or someone you know, I'd love to hear your thoughts. We don't always get to rewrite the past, but we can choose what we build next.